He hated to throw anything away. Our collection is not just about Mom and Dad's careers as much as it is about the Rogers family.
The Roy Rogers Museum had artifacts that told the story of a real American hero. It used to be a must-see for Wild West fans. However, it closed down pretty quickly in 2009. Then what? Was there something else going on? Or was it just the end of the century? What made them make the awful decision to end such an important part of history? Watch to find out the shocking truth about why it closed. Roy's journey to Hollywood. Roy Rogers was a hero in real life and on screen, not just a cowboy. His rise from farm kid to Western star is truly amazing. In 1911, he was born in a small Ohio town. Roy liked to sing and play the guitar, and Hollywood saw how good he was right away. He quickly became the star of Western movies because he always did the right thing and fought bad guys. His wife and co-star Dale Evans helped him do it. They both worked on the show together. They were happy, fair, brave, and kind, and they never gave up on each other. Dale wasn't just his co-star. She also wrote songs and went on the road with them. I admire how well they work together and look up to them. Of course, a cowboy can't do anything without a trusty horse. Raider, Roy's Golden Palomino, was the best horse of all. Trigger was not just any horse. He was famous on his own. Trigger was smart, quick, and agile, and he could do amazing things that made everyone gasp. When Trigger charged into action or bent down to talk to the crowd, he stole the show. People called him the smartest horse in the movies. Roy's job didn't just involve riding horses and finding bad guys. His voice was so lovely that it made songs sound like gems. Songs were written about hits like Happy Trails by fans all over the world. Roy's songs were more than just catchy tunes. They told stories of love, friendship, and adventure. They gave people hope that things would get better. Roy Rogers was a hero to many because he stood for good things instead of bad ones. Our hero didn't always need a cape, he proved. They only need cowboy boots and hats sometimes. He became a story because he was kind, brave, and devoted. Roy Rogers is still the first cowboy I think of when I want to name someone. Roy's life is full of hopes, adventures, and a close connection with his friends. No matter how much time goes by, real heroes will always be remembered. Check out the Roy Rogers Museum. It has artifacts from the Wild West that tell the story of a real hero, the museum's early days. A long time ago, something very special happened in the quiet California town of Apple Valley. It wasn't a castle or theme park. It was a museum dedicated to Roy Rogers, one of the most famous cowboys of all time. This was more than just a place to study history. It was a treasure chest full of stories, memories, and interesting events from Roy's amazing life. In order to show their appreciation for all of their fans, Roy Rogers and his wife Dale Evans wanted to create a one-of-a-kind place for them to hang out. In 1967, they opened the Roy Rogers Museum, which is full of amazing things that show their life as Western stars. It felt like I was in a Roy movie when I walked into the museum. The most interesting thing about the show was Trigger, Roy's famous golden horse. Trigger stood tall and proud, and even though he wasn't crossing fields anymore, he was kept alive so that fans could see him up close. Almost as if he were frozen in time, getting ready for his next trip. In their minds, people would picture the thrilling rides and brave acts he and Roy did together on film. He wasn't the only star, though. There were Roy's cowboy hats, shiny belt buckles, and boots that looked like they were made for a real hero all over the museum. Each movie outfit he wore told its own story. People could see his dependable guitar, which he used to play songs that made everyone happy and gave them hope. It also had the treasures of Queen of the West, Dale Evans. She gave her fans a taste of her wonderful gifts by giving them sparkling dresses, handwritten music, and memories from her shows. The things that Roy and Dale owned told the story of two people who lived in the Wild West for many years. The museum wasn't just about artifacts. It was also about emotions. There were movie pictures all over the walls that showed Roy at work. A lot of people have given him awards and letters of support for all he did. Nellie Bell, the strange little car from Roy's TV show, was one of the best things about the museum. Kids loved watching it and imagining it speeding across dry tracks. Families from all over the country came to the museum. For people from the West, it was like a pilgrimage, a trip to honor their hero. Parents told their kids stories about a time when cowboy movies were all the rage and shared their love for Roy and Dale. At the Roy Rogers Museum, people could now connect with a piece of history. It wasn't just a collection of things, it was a celebration of ideas like bravery, kindness, and adventure. For many years, it was a beautiful memorial to Roy Rogers that made everyone feel like the spirit of the Wild West would never go away. Why Branson was the perfect fit. At the beginning of the 2000s, the Roy Rogers Museum in Apple Valley, California, had a very hard time. Annually, fewer people were going there, even though it was full of wealth and fans liked it. For younger people, Western movies lost their magic as the world changed. In 2003, Roy Rogers' family chose to honor his memory by moving the museum to Branson, Missouri. What does Branson do? This busy city was famous for having activities that were fun for the whole family and for getting a lot of tourists. With its theaters, events, and other attractions, Branson seemed like the perfect place for the museum to move to. By moving to this exciting spot, the museum wanted to share Roy's story with more people and get people excited about the King of the Cowboys. Not only did moving to Branson keep the museum open, it also gave it a chance to get new life. It reopened, and people were excited about it again. A huge number of fans came to see the popular exhibits, such as Trigger, Dale Evans outfits, and Roy's platinum guitars. The museum did, however, add some new things to fit in with its lively surroundings. It went from being a small tribute to a busy hub of activity at its new location. To honor Roy's life, family and friends got together for special events. At fan meetings, people told each other stories about their favorite cowboy events. Live shows and themed displays give guests something to look forward to when they come back. The thrill never stopped, though. People who visited a place that was full of history and beauty seemed to be enchanted by it. For lifelong fans, it was a chance to remember special moments. It was a way for new fans to see why Roy Rogers had won so many fans' hearts. The migration to Branson initially seemed to the museum as a brilliant new phase. Roy's legacy felt as powerful as ever. Laughter rang through the exhibitions and throngs packed the hallways. The museum was more than just a structure. It was a link between generations, tying those who remembered the golden period of Westerns along with others only starting their journey. Branson gave the Roy Rogers Museum a second chance to shine, proving that the spirit of the Wild West was still alive and flourishing. What happens when a beloved cowboy legacy faces the changing times? Find out how Westerns lost their magic, the decline of Westerns. Westerns used to be the most popular form of entertainment in the United States. Millions of people were inspired by cowboys like Roy Rogers, John Wayne, and Gene Autry, who ran movie houses. Their stories of doing what was right, being brave, and being loyal were exciting. But over the years, something began to change. In the late 20th century, Westerns were coming to the end of their golden age. People around the world were looking for new stories and heroes. Western movies have long been a way to escape into the exciting Wild West. But as the world changed, so did what people wanted to see. By the 1980s and 1990s, Westerns had been replaced by action movies with flashing lights, superheroes in capes, and science fiction films. People were interested in fast-paced tales with huge explosions, futuristic gadgets, and interesting characters. Spaceships or superheroes flying through the sky just can't compare to the quiet draw of cowboys. This change is important for more than just movies. The world had changed, and it showed in it. A lot of young people grew up during a time when cowboys seemed more like characters from the past than living, breathing heroes. They liked stories with current relevant themes or lots of high-tech thrills. Video games, cartoons, and fantasy series were their new favorite ways to have fun. The Wild West was a long way behind. It was hard for the Roy Rogers Museum because of this change in culture. How could it still be important if the main story was set in a time and genre that not many people are familiar with? People who grew up watching Roy Rogers movies still liked him, but younger people didn't feel the same way about the cowboy and his adventures. Their view of the Wild West was so different that it seemed like another world. The museum tried to make this difference even. It held events, switched out displays, and even moved to Branson, Missouri to get more people to visit. Despite that, it was hard to keep up with the fast-paced entertainment scene of today. It was sometimes hard for younger visitors who may have come out of interest to connect with the simpler times that the museum celebrated. Less families planned trips to visit the museum over time. People started going less often, and the museum had a hard time getting new visitors. It seemed like the well-known horse stories were being left behind while the world went on. The fact that Westerns were losing popularity was both a sad and a happy reminder of how quickly society can change. Roy Rogers fans had a hard time finding ways to keep his spirit alive in a world that didn't seem to have any Wild West romance left. The museum's financial struggles. Taking care of a museum that is meant to honor the history of a bygone era is not an easy job. As the years went by, the Roy Rogers Museum had more and more money problems. Changing culture interests, rising operating costs, and a drop in the number of visitors created a storm that could not be controlled. It cost a lot of money to keep the museum open. There were bills to pay, people to hire, and valuable artifacts that needed to be taken care of. Everything had to be taken care of, from keeping Trigger's realistic look to making sure Roy's clothes and treasures stayed in great shape. But the money just wasn't adding up because fewer people were coming in. The economic crisis made things harder. When money is tight, families sometimes have to cut back on fun activities and trips. Museums felt the effects very strongly, especially those that focused on specific interests. Since the Roy Rogers Museum depends mostly on tourists, the number of visitors went down during these times. The site of the museum in Branson, Missouri, first gave hope for a better future. Still, it was hard to compete with more modern attractions even in this busy city. Younger people weren't as likely to make a trip to the museum their first concern, and old supporters, while dedicated, weren't enough to cover the costs of keeping it open. Roy Rogers' family and people who supported the museum didn't give up easily. They launched fundraising efforts to keep the museum afloat. From special events to auctions of select memorabilia, they tried to rally fans and raise the money needed to preserve the museum. Promotions were designed to lure in people, and the museum made every attempt to remain contemporary. Despite these attempts, the obstacles kept piling up. It was obvious that the museum's financial troubles weren't only about the day-to-day charges. They reflected a deeper problem: the weakening cultural link to Westerns. Built to celebrate a hero from a golden past getting more and more far off in people's memories, the museum had been, though the challenges were great, the family put out great effort to keep the dream. Maintaining the museum became more tough annually. Roy Rogers' legacy was being preserved, but it was becoming abundantly obvious that time and money were not on our side. In the end, the Roy Rogers Museum's money problems were a sign of the times. Even though everyone who tried to keep it open did so with sincerity and drive, the hard facts of falling interest and rising costs proved too much to overcome. The heartbreaking decision to close. In 2009, the Roy Rogers Museum was at a moment of choice. Even after years of protection, the problems got too big for that to work. The number of visitors kept going down, and money problems got worse. The Rogers family had to make a tough choice because they had worked hard to keep the museum open. After giving it a lot of thought, they chose to shut the doors for good. It wasn't easy to make this choice. The Rogers family saw the museum as more than just a building. It was a live tribute to Roy Rogers, Dale Evans, and the legacy they had built together. Roy's fans saw him as a symbol of hope, bravery, and kindness, and the flag stood for decades of love and respect. It felt like they were saying goodbye to a piece of history, and the history of everyone who had ever loved a horse story. When the news came out, the town was filled with sadness. People who had been fans of the museum for a long time and had been there as kids shared their sadness. Some families who had seen Trigger and Nellie Bell were very sad when they learned they would never walk those halls again. A lot of people who liked Westerns and Roy Rogers felt like they had lost someone important. In order to make sure the memories would never be lost, the family had to make the hard decision to sell the museum's highly valuable collections. Things that were on display before were now spread out in many places. A private collector bought Roy's favorite horse, Trigger. Dale Evans's shiny clothes, cowboy hats, and even Nellie Bell, the reliable little car, were also sold. The sale was both a party and a goodbye. Fans from all over the world are bidding on pieces of Western history to honor Roy Rogers. It was sad to know that the collection would never be put together in one place again, but it was good to see the things find new homes. What made things the hardest for the Rogers family was giving up the museum wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was also the end of a very close relationship. Still, it made them feel better to know that Roy Rogers' legacy would live on in the hands of people who liked and respected him. The Roy Rogers Museum's closing marked the end of an era and a reminder of how one cowboy could touch the lives of millions of people for a long time. Even after the museum closed, Roy Rogers' influence endures. How is his legacy carried forward through time? The timeless influence of Roy Rogers. Even though the Roy Rogers Museum closed in 2009, its impact can still be felt in many ways. The Great Sale found new homes for the artifacts that used to be on display in the museum. Fans, collectors, and supporters from all over the world bid on these unique items to make sure that Roy Rogers' memory would live on in loved collections for years to come. Everything from Trigger to Roy's famous cowboy hat is now a physical memory of the man who inspired millions. The goal of the sale wasn't just to sell artifacts, it was also to tell the next generation about Roy. The people who owned these items often showed them off in their homes or private collections, or even lent them to other institutions. They were guardians of a great tradition. It made sure that pieces of Roy's life would be remembered even if the museum closed down. Many other things besides relics were left behind by Roy Rogers. His adventures are still being written about, and new people can see them in movies and TV shows. Roy's bravery, kindness, and loyalty will always be important, in part because of great TV shows and streaming services. Fans of the King of the Cowboys keep him living through events, conversations, and celebrations of his life. These can happen in person or online. Books and biographies have written about Roy's life. Authors are writing about his amazing life and work and how it changed American culture. These stories will keep him in history so that people in the future will know about the cowboy who became famous. The story at the Roy Rogers Museum is also a good way to learn about how to keep cultural heritage alive. It was sad when the museum closed, but it makes us think of how important it is to keep these places around to keep the past alive. It stresses how important it is to adapt to new times, get younger people involved, and come up with new ways to keep historical legacy alive. Roy Rogers had an impact that goes beyond the museum that bears his name. People all over the world are still moved by his songs, movies, and morals, which show how strong the cowboy spirit is. Even though the museum is no longer there, the history it honored will never be lost. Roy Rogers will always be known as the cowboy who made people laugh, gave them hope, and made them want to go on adventures. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through Roy Rogers' legacy, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click on the next video popping up on your screen to keep the adventure going.